Hi everyone, and welcome to our second installment of our Canadian Creator Series as part of our 2020 Fall Digital Season. You're no doubt looking forward to our virtual premiere of Kirsten Ewart's Warmth for String Quartet, written for the St. Roch, housed at the Vancouver Maritime Museum. I want to extend a special thanks to the Vancouver Maritime Museum for allowing us to record her work on the ship itself. I'm excited today to be joined pre-release by the composer herself to talk a bit more about her work. Kirsten completed her initial composition studies at the University of Regina and is currently pursuing a Master's of Music and Composition at New York University Steinhardt. Also joining us today is the curator of the Vancouver Maritime Museum, Duncan MacLeod. He completed his undergraduate degree at UBC, studying ancient history, cultures, and languages. Duncan then traveled to England to pursue a master's degree in classical archaeology at Oxford University. He has been the curator of the Vancouver Maritime Museum since 2015, and in 2016 traveled through the Arctic with One Ocean Expeditions, lecturing about the European quest for the Northwest Passage. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me today. Duncan, we'll start with you. So if our audience is a little bit about me, having lived in Vancouver my entire life, I'm embarrassed to say that before this project, I didn't really know much about the history of the St. Roch, even though it's such a special ship in the history of seafaring expeditions. So can you tell our audience a little bit about the St. Roch and how it came to be housed at the Vancouver Maritime Museum?
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for having me join you today. The St. Roch is a wonderful piece. It's sort of the centerpiece of our museum for anyone who has been here, and it's a unique vessel. It was built in Vancouver in 1928. So we just celebrated its 90th birthday 2 summers ago, and it was built for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to really serve as an arm of the Canadian government in the Arctic, servicing RCMP stations and carrying out other duties such as census taking, police work up in the Arctic, and other governmental functions. And it's a unique vessel in its construction, and it was built, if you come and see it, you'll see that it's built with sort of an egg-shaped hull, and you can't quite see from looking at the vessel, but the planks, the wood that was used was quite thick, and there are extremely strong beams that were used to build the vessel. And this is because of its work in the Arctic, and it needed to be able to survive up there and work through or avoid getting crushed by massive amounts of ice. And so the unique shape of the vessel and the strength of the vessel allowed it to pop out of the ice if it was ever in a position where there was too much pressure on either side. Unfortunately, that strange shape would often lead to a lot of pitching and rolling in some of the more open seas. So that's a little bit about the makeup of the vessel, and it gained sort of its iconic status in Canada when it became the first vessel to sail through the Northwest Passage from west to east between 1940 and 1942. And then it sailed back from Halifax to Vancouver in 1944. And in 1950, it sailed south from Vancouver through the Panama Canal and up the east coast of North America back to Halifax. And this made it the first vessel to circumnavigate North America. And it's interesting to think that that circumnavigation came just a few years before we had humans land on the moon. You know, to put that in perspective in terms of sort of exploration, navigation accomplishments. How it came to Vancouver and how it came to be in the Vancouver Maritime Museum is an interesting story. And most people ask, well, how did you get the St. Roch inside the building. And in fact, it was actually the building that was built around the St. Roch. After it was retired, it was sold to the city of Vancouver for $5,000, which was approximately the cost of the fuel to sail it from Halifax to Vancouver. And it sailed here back through the Panama Canal in 1954. And then it was laid idle for a few years until 1958, when it was decided that it would be part of the Maritime Museum that was going to be built at Kitts Point, where we are now. And it was sailed to Kitts Point and pulled up on some winches onto the beach into a cradle. And then the dry dock was built around it. And about 12 years later, the shelter around it, the A-frame, was completed. So that's how it actually got into the building.
Wow, that's you know, again, as a Vancouverite, I can't say how many times as I was a kid driving by the museum and wondering, you know, as a kid concocting these stories about how you must have gone the ship in there and why I came to be there, and also not knowing the history of it. So it's really, really fascinating and amazing to hear it through adult eyes, and especially to put it in perspective, like you said, of when this exploration happened in the progress of human explorers, if you will. Kirsten, with all that history, why and when did you write this piece?
Yeah, so I came across this project, I think it would have been in March of 2018. I knew that it was sort of coming up as a thing that I could write for. I was in the middle of writing for another project, so I wasn't sure I'd be able to submit anything, but it was for the Canadian Music Centre's Jean Coulthard String Quartet readings. I think it was their second year offering that reading. And so I finished up a piece, and I had 2 weeks until the deadline for this piece. Wrote something really quick, submitted it, and was very happy to have been selected for that reading process.
Yeah, and you know, having the Jean Coulthard's legacy is so wide-reaching that even now, years after her death in the landscape of Canadian composition, it's wonderful to see that she's still in some ways sponsoring current Canadian composition. So that's a really great legacy to observe in real time and in our own time. Duncan, Symphony 21 recorded Kirsten's piece on the ship itself, and obviously the piece was written for the ship and has a deep connection to the crew and the vessel itself. It was a deeply meaningful process for me overseeing it. Obviously, I didn't play in it, but was there working behind the scenes. It was a deeply meaningful process connecting the music with the physical environment. As someone who's familiar with the history of the ship, as you are there any specific spots, locations, artifacts when you stand on or around the ship that really bring the St. Roch to life for you when you explore them in person from a research or archaeological point of view?
I think that's a great question. And the St. Roch is unique in terms of artifacts. It is technically classified as an artifact, and there are few artifacts that you can actually walk through and really experience. But I think being able to be on board and walk through the deck house of the St. Roch as it is now, which is the 1944 configuration, gives you a sense of the cramped quarters of the ship. It might look large from the outside when you're looking in the windows of the Maritime Museum, but when you're on board and you see the size of the beds, or 2 bunk beds in one small cabin, you begin to get a sense of what it might have been like for the 8, 9, 10, 12 people that were on board for weeks or months at a time in the Arctic. In terms of other artifacts, one that we have on display right now is a really interesting flask that was a possession of Jack Foster's, who was an engineer on the St. Roch. And not only is it interesting to see as an everyday object that would have been used to hold water or whiskey, but it's also a fantastic record of his life in the Arctic, because he has inscribed on it, or he has had people inscribe on it, their names from all over the Arctic, people he met. So you see people's names or nicknames and associated geographic locations. So it's almost a bit of an atlas inscribed on this small flask, and that's on display just outside the St. Roch.
When you describe it as an atlas with names from the past, it has the makings of a superhero movie, I think. So maybe Marvel can get in touch with the VMM and make something out of that. Kirsten, similar question to Duncan, but from a compositional point of view now. The genesis of this piece was fairly open-ended, as I understand, with regards to the Cool Torrid string sessions, in that it was simply what inspires you about the ship, and write a piece based on that inspiration. So in that vein, I understand you visited the ship before writing this piece. How did your visit inspire you to compose in the direction that you did? And was there anything specific, whether it's the ship itself or artifacts, that served as a central point, a focal point for you in writing the piece?
Yeah, I think, there are some things that stick out as a composer. Working with string instruments automatically, you can make some really great sort of icy sounds using harmonics. And that was an obvious line of thought. But when I went onto the ship, I was looking for something a little more human, a human connection to the ship, just because I love connecting things to real human emotions and to the people involved in, art or artifacts. So when I did the tour of the ship, one of the first things that they showed us was the living quarters, and they were talking about how the crew members would, spend most of their time there to keep warm, and there was this little stove sort of oven thing in the living quarters, and they were telling us that they could only heat it so warm, otherwise there would be condensation that would appear in the cabin, which would obviously lead to various issues on board the ship. And then I got to see the rest of the living quarters, the food and engine room, all kinds of things that could have been of inspiration, but I kept coming back to, a group of people sleeping in this little cabin together, dreaming of, the warmth of home and the warmth of their family, all protected by the only slight warmth of this oven that is heating their space.
That's a really great title then for the quartet. That's really amazing. So now shifting, we're talking about the St. Roch as in the past, obviously, and how the past inspires our present. But now speaking to the future in a bit more broader terms, Duncan, how does the Vancouver Maritime Museum and museums in general contribute to community and the fostering of education and communal bonds in both regular, but more specifically COVID times? And as a curator, is there anything specific that you're looking forward to bringing to the museum to aid in that community mission?
That's a great question, and one we're all grappling with right now. The Maritime Museum and museums in general, I think are wonderful community gathering places, and that's one of the main things that we as cultural institutions do, contribute to the community. It was somewhat easier in pre-COVID times, but still is applicable post-COVID. whether that's in-person meetings or and gatherings or virtual, and just exactly what we're doing right now, talking over Zoom. That's one of the things that we're trying to do to reach out to more people, and that we're looking forward to sort of delivering in terms of future programs. We are developing more and more online lectures about our current exhibits, about new books that are coming out related to maritime history and maritime heritage. So those are some of the ways that we're trying to engage, but also as a physical location, with people not being able to do as many activities and thinking about the pandemic, we still are a great option as sort of hopefully a getaway. And I think that, you know, music, Kirsten, also provides that sort of release and escape from some of the difficulties that people are dealing with. We have an exhibition on right now that's a visual tour through British Columbia for people who aren't as easily able to travel. So we've taken paintings from our collection and arranged them from Vancouver to the north coast of British Columbia. So the museum can still, even in COVID times, act as a way for people to get out and experience culture and art and history. And I just thinking back to my earlier answer about the St. Roch, I should correct myself. It was 1966 that the A-frame was finished, but we're looking forward to providing new exhibits in the fall, and also trying to develop new exhibit programs and virtual programs for 2021 and beyond. Hopefully we'll be able to gather larger groups of people in the new year or later in the new year.
Well, and obviously, as you said, you know, even as we're doing right now, the museum is serving as a cultural focal point to be able to engage with our viewers at home and all around the world. And for the record, if you hadn't said anything about the A-frame, I don't think anyone would have caught you. So I think you're safe. Kirsten, obviously and similar to what we were just talking about with Duncan, with regards to pre and present COVID, during COVID, the idea of many people visiting a single place in person, whether that's an artistic installation or a museum or a concert hall or anything of the like, is not recommended, or many times not possible. As a composer, having written this piece, you know, to use the word programmatic in the sense that it's telling a story or devoted to a specific arc of an idea, not necessarily narrated, but as opposed to, for all of you at home, when we talk about absolute music being something like a sonata in E flat major by whomever, where it's just music for music's sake. So in that conversation of programmatic music, as a composer, do you find now writing music about specific places or things like the St. Roch has a way of creating a communal focal point for people? Or during COVID, are you moving towards, as a composer, more conceptual concepts to try and reach you know, even more people by not attaching it to an artifact or an installation or a place, given that we can't have those gatherings?
Yeah, oh, that's a really good question. So I have kind of always written mostly programmatic music, even if the piece itself, the idea came from a musical idea. I always try and, as I said before, give it sort of a human connection, something that the listener can latch onto. That being said, I think using your imagination and adventuring, you know, closing your eyes and putting yourself in a different place with music is always one of the best experiences. I think people don't often enough just put on some headphones, close their eyes, and just let the music take them somewhere. you know, it's often put on in the background while they do something else. So that's always one of the things I encourage people to do, especially now when they feel like they can't adventure out, is to find a piece of art or music or a film that takes them someplace that they can't go right now or they can't be right now, and enjoy it thoroughly.
Well, and as you said earlier, that really relates to the idea of 8 to 12 people huddling together in their own social bubble, if you will, yearning for a different time and a different warmth.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
profound. Well, thank you both. Thanks to both of you, Kirsten and Duncan, for joining us today. For all of you watching at home, whether you're watching with us in real time in October 2020 or much in the future when hopefully COVID is nothing but a distant memory, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today and that you learned along with me a little bit about the piece that you're about to hear in a few hours, as well as the inspiration behind it. On behalf of myself and the entire team at Symphony 21, I hope that you and your family remain healthy and happy through the rest of 2020 and into the future. Thank you again for joining in with us. And please now enjoy our premiere of Kirsten Ewart's Warmth for String Quartet.